Hi everyone. Today I'd like to continue the little, for lack of a better word, the little series I'm doing for the opening the key reading that I'm doing for Jesus of Nazareth. Yes. A few of you expressed that you thought that was pretty cool, so I thought I'd keep doing it and continue into Operation 2 and hopefully get through at least 2 and 3 today. We'll see. So yeah, I unfortunately, two things. First, I have to switch decks, which is sort of unfortunate because I can't seem to find one of the cards in my Rider-Waite deck. And I'm usually really careful about things, but I think I used one of them as a bookmark really quickly. I was reading something and I think I used it as a bookmark, and now I can't find which book I used it in, and so I have no idea where it is. So that's a problem. So I'm going to switch to the Golden Tarot that I mentioned in one of my previous videos from the other day, because it's the most like the Rider-Waite deck that I have. So I didn't want to switch to a Crowley deck because that just, the energy is so different, whereas this is sort of along the same lines. And the other thing that's good about switching to this deck is that by using all this medieval early Renaissance art, so much of it has this kind of Christian vibe for me anyway. So I think that'll only help. Secondly, one of you asked or said that Jesus was better represented by the Hanged Man as a significator, and I take tremendous issue with that, and I will explain why, as opposed to the Magician, of course, which is what I used in the previous video. To focus on the Hanged Man as a significator of Jesus is to really focus on only one aspect, granted a very big aspect of his life, but only one aspect of his life. A significator shouldn't really, when you're doing something like a reading for a person, your significator really should represent as much of that person's overall personality or archetype as possible. And we wanted to know the origins of Jesus. We wanted to know where he came from and how he got to be where he ended up. And so the Magician better represents that. The Hanged Man, if I were to ask a question about the Passion more specifically, then I would probably use the Hanged Man, or I could use the Hanged Man. I personally probably wouldn't. And the other reason is just, if you watch my video on the Magician is a representation of Christ, or the idea of Christ, to be anointed and to be the Word of God, to be the Logos of God, all of the will of God, the creative will. All of those things are represented by the Magician, and also the Magician is associated with exorcism, sometimes with healing and miracles and the miraculous, and all of those things are also associated with Jesus. So the Magician much better represents Jesus than the Hanged Man. Okay, so let's get started. So the second operation is, of course, about the 12 astrological houses, and operations 2 and 3 are probably our easiest. 4 is not so easy. 4 is the most difficult out of all of them, and then 5 is pretty simple as well. So I have to use my bed here because I just don't have enough space on that table that I usually use to show you the ring that is created. But of course, we're going to take our significator, the Magician, and I apologize for the lighting. I hope it's okay. I invoke thee, Ea-O, that thou wilt send Heru, the great angel, who art set over the operations of the secret wisdom, that he may lay his hand invisibly upon these consecrated cards of art, and that thereby we may obtain true knowledge of hidden things, the glory of thine ineffable name. Amen. All right, let's give them a shuffle. And of course, our question is the same as yesterday's. What were the origins of the historical Jesus of Nazareth? Where did he come from? And how did he end up where he ended up? And of course, we are doing the second operation of the same reading that we commenced yesterday. Again, just thank you to all of you for all your support on all these videos, and some of you leave really, really nice comments for me, and I appreciate them so much. I really do. And I'm glad that many of you feel that you're learning something from all these. I'm so glad. Alright, just a few more. I find that the second and third operations, you don't really have to shuffle quite as intensely as you might for other things. I mean, you guys know that I love to shuffle and really mix them up. But with this operation, in the third, you really are mixing them up just by doing the spread as you're supposed to. So of course we cut, because now we have to deal them out all individually into 12 piles to represent the 12 astrological houses. And of course, the astrological houses represent essentially areas of one's life or fields of one's life. For instance, the first house is all about the personality of the individual, whereas the opposite house, the seventh house, is all about partnerships with other people. So each house is sort of opposite from the one, or antithetical to the one opposite it, which is interesting. So everything is nice and balanced here. And I find that in the opening of the key, the way I try to conceptualize it is that in some ways it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. With the first operation, you're looking at the 4 elements, which is the most basic strata, or stratum. And the next layer is the houses, which is a broad aspect. Ooh, shoot, what pile was it in? A broader aspect of astrology. And then the signs are a little more specific, and then the decanots are even more specific, and then the tree of life is sort of general and specific at the same time. It's sort of weird. Sorry, I lost my spot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think 1, 2, 3, 4. Ah, that's what I thought. Okay. Almost done. Now, after you turn these over, you can, of course, really play with these operations. If you want to look into a certain pile for kicks, I mean, there's nothing stopping you, of course. Alright. I'll do my best to make sure you can see all of this. I can't make any guarantees here. As you know, my webcam is attached, so it's a little tricky sometimes to get all this in view. All right, that's about as good as it's going to get. I hope that you can see everything. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this deck, a lot of the images are very much based or are almost exactly the same as the images from the Rider-Waite deck. So that is why, again, why I chose to use this. This is the best I could do. Okay, so we'll go. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the cover card of each pile. We're starting with the first house over here, and as I said before, the first house is about the personality, usually, of the native. It's called in astrology, but in this case, we would say the querent, the personality of the querent, or sort of like their personal. I don't know. The first house is sort of tricky, just because, not often does a situation have to do really with a personality thing, but sometimes it can, of course. And there we have the Six of Coins, and so perhaps we can say that at this operation we're seeing our querent Jesus as being someone who is personally become at this point very generous. Excuse me. And that's just become a character trait. Someone who is very giving to people who don't necessarily have good resources. The next house is the second house of associated with Taurus, and this is material possessions. And we have there the King of Coins, or the King of Pentacles. And we didn't see a King of Pentacles type person there in the first operation, so this is a new person that we might not really know about. We could say that maybe this is someone who is involved with Jesus' financial state. Of course, we often think of Jesus as someone who had very little. But we do have a King of Coins here in the second house. So this might indicate his father. I'm almost getting like a St. Francis of Assisi kind of vibe here. Someone who is perhaps fairly well off. It could also represent simply people in power that surrounded Jesus. We talked in the first operation a little bit about how Jesus rebelled against material power and those who wielded it to put others down and to control other people. And perhaps that it's getting to that issue. The third house is Gemini-ish, and it is a house representing usually intelligence, but communications, basically interactions with others. And we have the Nine of Swords, and again, that is a card that was in the first operation, and we talked about how he was concerned about people's guilt and people's feelings of pain, because he was someone who had once also experienced pain. And so perhaps it's sort of a continuing theme, a continuing the interaction with people who were under great emotional pressure, perhaps, and required, again, we in that first operation we talked a lot about Jesus attempting to bring a message of hope to people who didn't have much hope. And so perhaps that's continuing that theme there. In this house, the fourth house is usually the house of private matters, things that are more related to the home, family life, and that sort of thing. And we have the Worlds here, and perhaps this is saying that in Jesus' family life, or Jesus' the people that were close to Jesus were very important to him, were everything for him. The world is an interesting thing to have there. It almost, I kind of see it as, that's tricky. I'm not sure what I want to say about that. Nothing's really coming to me overtly on that one. Uh, the fifth house, so I'm just going to skip it for now. The fifth house is usually the house of creative passions, sort of what um, the area of the client's life that they're particularly interested in, passionate about, a leader in. And we do have the sun here, which is also interesting, a very powerful card to have in the fifth house. And perhaps we could say that Jesus was very passionate about liberation and freedom. You know, that was an issue in the first operation as well. Issues of freedom from materiality and from the constraints of materiality. And so perhaps that's something that he was particularly passionate about here. The next house over here is characterized by the 10 of coins or pentacles. And that house is the house of Virgo, technically. And it's a house that I tend to associate with usually the person's health or well-being. And we do have the 10 of coins, which seems to say that that Jesus was pretty physically okay at this stage. You know, that he had a support network, I want to say, to make sure that he had a foundation there. Again, I get the sense that he was a very communal person, was very much interested in community and community support networks, just based on the previous operation and this here, perhaps. For the 8th house, or rather, I'm sorry, this was the 6th. I misspoke the first time. This is the 7th house over here. This is the house of partnerships with other people, and usually very intimate partnerships. Usually, it's a house associated with marriage. Actually, Libra is typically seen as a sign of marriage. And we do have the Ace of Cups, which is particularly interesting. And I would be curious to see what that's saying. I mean, we could read that on different levels. We could read that in a platonic sense, and perhaps that represents the beginning of his ministry, and kind of, you know, at the point where he's starting to get disciples, you know, as we're told he did. Or it could represent some kind of marital-esque relationship that began at this time. We may see, we may not. Be curious to see what's in that pile. The 8th house, which is the house of Scorpio, and is the house of usually things received from others as opposed to things. Of course, it's opposite the house of Taurus, the second house. And Taurus is the house of material possessions, and Scorpio is sometimes seen as the house of things inherited from other people through their passing. It's usually seen as a house of inheritances, things that are gained through death, oddly enough. And we do have the 8 of Cups there, which is interesting. Maybe. Perhaps it's just talking about, honestly, I'm not sure what that's saying. I've never seen the 8 of Cups there before. Again, you know, the opening of the key, I think in general, this is just an advice for those of you who are doing this spread in your spare time. I think it is important to sort of learn to gloss over the things that you don't necessarily understand. It's okay if you don't get everything. It really is. If you sit and try to pinpoint what every single thing means, you'll be here for days, and you probably will end up with just as cloudy a picture as when you started. So honestly, at this point, when I do get to this stage, or any stage really of this spread, you know, if I don't get something, I just move on. Don't be afraid of that. The next house is the house of Sagittarius, the house of usually travel, or usually seen as a house of travel or teaching, guruship, or strong spirituality type stuff. And we do have the Seven of Wands, and it's almost like that's the ascetic part of Jesus. It seems like Jesus was pretty harsh in his spirituality, and was very rigorous about it. The next house is the 10th house. Excuse me, the house of, usually, as opposed to the 4th house, which is more about your relationship privately with people that are close to you. This is sort of your relationship to the world. It's sort of your image that you put on for people. And it is death, which is interesting. Perhaps I want to say that really, for a house that really represents, in a way, material power and how one presents themselves to the world, death is sort of saying that he let go of all that very easily. He didn't have a lot of attachments to people's opinions of him, and perhaps people saw him at this point as very sort of along the same lines as this is kind of ascetic. The next house is the 11th house, and that's the house usually associated with groups and group mentality, different organizations that the person might be a part of. And we do have the 9 of Coins, which is interesting. It's almost like he may have, at the same time of rejecting material notoriety in some ways, at the same time he hung around with people that were pretty well off, which is sort of surprising. The 9 of Coins seems to indicate that to me. The 9 of Coins always represents wealth to me, and sort of like people who have nice things, luxurious kind of things. And that's in his 11th house, which is interesting. And last but not least, we have the 12th house governed by Pisces, and we have the 5 of Coins there. And the 12th house is about... the 12th house is kind of weird. It's sort of like the querents, sometimes dreams, sort of subconscious things, sometimes psychological issues, or, in general, it represents the querents' state of mind, I almost want to say. And we have the 5 of Coins, which does represent poverty. So this is very interesting. It's almost like the poor in spirit kind of business from the Beatitudes. So we have sort of very diverse image of these various areas of Jesus' life, and all of them are sort of, at least the way I'm reading them, is sort of along the lines of what the Bible tells us. There are a few outliers that seem kind of strange, but I am going to guess, based on the last reading, the last reading was governed mostly by the earth pile in the 8 of Wands, and so perhaps the magician will be found in an earth pile, or from the end of that reading, we had sort of a flight, we had an escape from perhaps danger even. So maybe he's in the Sagittarius pile, that would kind of be the obvious one, and he's not. Technically, you're given only 2 chances to get this right. I never really play by that rule, frankly, but if you want to be very orthodox about the way you do the opening of the key, then that is how you're supposed to do it, technically. Okay, let's try the 10th house. And he's in the 10th house, so we got it on the second try. So technically this should be valid, or more so in the Orthodox standard. Okay, I'm going to turn these around so that you can sort of see them a bit better. Let's see, I'm going to collect the piles just so I can push them toward the camera a little bit more here. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. So we have the magician over here, and I do like to stick them up as I go through them. And so he's surrounded by strength and death, and technically those two cancel out here. So the magician is sort of just, for lack of a better word, he's sort of just chilling there. He's not very much affected by strength or death, but they still sort of vaguely exist. So we might say that the magician was, in this case, Jesus, was someone who did have a lot of fortitude and well, I don't want to say a lot because, again, he's not very strongly affected by it either. But perhaps he's someone who was, again, generally known for his fortitude and for his lack of attachment, basically, in a very general sense. And again, we counted to the left yesterday, so we will continue to count to the left, and how convenient that, in this case, he is facing to the left. So we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we come to the Emperor. And the Emperor is surrounded by temperance and death, and here these two do not cancel out because we have a fire card in the middle. I sort of want to say that, again, there are these issues of power and authority here, but perhaps part of his authority or his sense of authority in the eyes of others, because of course we have to ground this reading in the 10th, in terms of the 10th house, his personal sense of authority came from his overall kind of temperate manner, and again, that lack of attachment to things is just how I keep seeing the death card here. That sort of mild disposition perhaps gave him a sort of experience from which to talk from, or perhaps it's also saying, the interesting thing is that almost every card here, actually every single card here, is a major arcana, which I have never seen before, actually. Very interesting. And we do have, well, perhaps this is again that conflict of authority and power that we talked a little bit about in the first operation, and maybe wanting to see that power mitigated to some extent, not wanting it to be so overt, perhaps seeing the political power in the region at the time as being too over the top. I almost see temperance and death as wanting them to, as the power needing to go through a more balanced transition. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We do have death, surrounded by the Emperor and the Magician. And it does seem that perhaps even he was, perhaps already we do have his death, which is very odd. I didn't expect to get that this soon. But it does seem we might have something there along those lines, where he was put to death by a political authority. Very interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we return to the Magician, so that ends the counting. So again, to kind of re-summarize, we started with the Magician being someone who, perhaps in this perspective, had even courage in the face of death to some extent, or was kind of an ascetic type of person who generally resisted temptation, so to speak, who came up against political power in form of the emperor, and as a result met his death. If we can continue on and pair from here, and again, the interesting thing is that we are in the 10th house, and so it's almost like what we're seeing here is how he became famous, how he became someone that was actually talked about, because as we saw in the first operation, it wasn't really that he was that overt. In general, it seemed like he wasn't that. What's the word I want to say? Goodness. It wasn't like he was all that aggressive. It's almost more just like he had a very specific message against political power, and that got him in trouble here. But in doing so, it boosted his message. And historically, this all makes sense, certainly. So if we're going to go ahead and pair, to pull them out, we have the Magician and, let's see, we've got Strength and Death here. And I would say, again, that represents courage in the face of death, almost like a desire to die in a bizarre way, almost wanting that to happen. Which way did this go? Here we go. Next we have the Emperor and the Tower. And yeah, Either that, I'm almost getting the sense of that representing war and conflict, just because both of them are so Mars-like and have a strong tendency towards aggression, and the two augmenting each other so powerfully, both of them being fire signs, fire cards rather. I almost get the sense that this is a particularly aggressive kind of leader, and we did see that in terms of the King of Swords yesterday in the first operation. Jesus was kind of hounded in that first operation near the end of it by someone who was just a naturally aggressive kind of guy, a very confrontational kind of person. And alternatively, we could see this as the toppling of political power, as the destruction of a political personage, so to speak, political leader. And then we have temperance. So the overall ending of this phase of this operation is one of moderation and balance. So I do, it's so hard not to read this without going to the Bible or thinking about what we're told in the Bible. It's very hard to read it without that bias, and that's the tricky part of doing this, I think. But I do get the sense, there's a tremendous amount of fire in this reading too, and I just get the sense that Jesus was known as a very feisty kind of upstart, and maybe again that's what got him in trouble. And this destruction at the hands of political authority, it could represent some of the issues of Rome destroying Jerusalem, and but I don't know how we get temperance after that as sort of a balance, getting back on track afterwards, needing to recuperate. I don't know. Again, the weird thing is that after you get to the second operation, everything from there gets more and more mysterious. and it does become harder. I admit my skills get really limited from Operation 2 through 5, so this is sort of as good practice as for me as it is for you guys, I hope, and just seeing it done. Let's see. So that's about it. The second operation is generally really short, and we would have to see what comes up in the next operation. So again, to summarize the main points or the main attributes of the first two operations. First operation took place in the earth pile, in the material pile, and we had the Eight of Wands covering it, representing things happening really quickly or just speedy happenings, really, in terms of materiality. Then in this we had the 10th house, which is sort of similar, along the similar lines, having to do with personal notoriety and how the public viewed Jesus, perhaps. And we had it covered by death, which perhaps shows that he became more well known because of his death. That was sort of unjust. Or even unexpected, perhaps. The tower here was very strong with the emperor. And perhaps the collapse of that was seen as a shock to people and became a motivation for people to remedy their ways, in a sense. I almost want to say that it's like people saw this death of this innocent person, and that became a motivation for them to try to become a little more balanced, as he tried to. I don't know. I mean, of course, you can read this very fluidly, and we'll have to see what comes up in the next operation. So again, none of this is all that definitive here. So please bear with me, and hopefully I'll see you. Hopefully I can keep your interest for the next 3 operations. We'll see how that goes. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.